Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Why Does Process Transformation Always Seem So Painful When It Doesn't Have to Be? I'm Teresa Resick, and I'm the Director of Webinars here at AIM, and AIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Neil Ward-Dutton of MWD Advisors and Neil Young of FlowForma. And FlowForma is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience. So feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows that you have on your screen. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all of the available widgets that we have for you today. We do have a new feature for you, and it's the group chat. And you open this by clicking in on the widget icon that is in the bottom of your screen, and that's when you mouse over, it will say group chat, and just open that up. With this, you'll be able to speak with each other, but be aware that everyone will be able to see everything posted in there. But Allison and I here at AIM will also be joining the group chat throughout the webinar as well. So feel free to comment and interact with each other throughout the webinar. And you can still ask questions to the speakers also throughout the hour using that Q&A feature, and that's to the left side of your screen. And we will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 to 10 minutes to answer them. But you can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list. And there's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. At the end of the webinar, a brief survey will open, and it'll open in a new browser tab for you. And I would greatly appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback and suggest other topics for us to cover. You can also access this survey, again, with the widgets across the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. So now I would like to introduce more in depth our speakers that we have with us today. Neil Ward-Dutton is MWD Advisors co-founder and research director, and is one of Europe's most experienced and high-profile strategic IT advisors and industry analysts. His areas of expertise include digital transformation, business process management, enterprise architecture, and IT strategy. Neil acts as an advisor to large European organizations across industries and sectors as diverse as financial services, retail, utilities, and government, as well as providing advice to a number of leading technology vendors. And we also have Neil Young, and Neil has worked with Microsoft Technologies for over 20 years and has been actively involved in the SharePoint community for the past 10. As an entrepreneur, Neil is the CEO of FlowForma, who is the leading provider of business process management tools for Microsoft Office 365. Neil has spent the last couple of years driving FlowForma's innovation strategy and is passionate about revolutionizing the traditional BPM space to enable the business user to meet the needs of today's demanding workplace. This passion has resulted in the launch of FlowForma BPM, an award-winning enablement tool that empowers users to create and streamline processes smarter and faster, utilizing the familiar SharePoint platform without any coding. So right now, I am going to turn things over to Neil Ward-Dutton to begin our conversation today. Neil?
Thanks very much, Teresa. It's a pleasure to be here. So thanks very much, everybody, for taking the time. Excuse me. So I'm going to take up about 20 minutes of your time and talk to you really about what we're seeing in our sort of broad research community as we talk to people about how they're looking at digital transformation and how they're looking at trying to drive changes in their business and to their business processes as a part of that. And that's really pretty much what I do all day, every day in various forms. So I'm kind of summarizing with you research that I've been doing with my team over about the last 18 months. And I'm going to start off by just very briefly talking a bit about the context. So, you know, one of the first things we often come across, which is a challenge, is just getting people to think in the right kind of context, get themselves set when they're thinking about what digital transformation actually means to their organization. And this is something I'd encourage everybody to do, is to just take a step back and have a bit of a think about what's really the scope, what's within the scope of that for your organization. So often we find that people fixate on the potential of new digital native competitors to disrupt their businesses, whether that's, I'm almost shying away from saying their names now because they get talked about so often, but companies like Uber and Airbnb, people will get stuck on kind of thinking about how they react to those kinds of issues. And that's fine to start there as a starting point for your analysis of what digital transformation might mean for you. But actually, as you can probably see from the gaps on this chart, there's more to think about. And the bigger picture, really, which forms the context for all of this, is not only new digital native competitors, but also, moving to the left, no doubt, the impact of new customer expectations, of immediacy when we deal with our customers, responsiveness, the transparency, provision of accurate information, the ability to work across multiple channels. So, on the website, maybe in a store or in a physical venue, maybe through a call center, an IVR, maybe through a mobile app, maybe through a social platform. The ability to provide consistent, reliable information and service across all of those channels, those are things that we've started to take for granted. And a few years ago, when I talked to B2B organizations in this space and talked to them about what they were thinking about, many of them said, yeah, all of those things are fine for consumer-facing businesses, but we don't really think that's important to us. And that's very much changed over the last couple of years. We're seeing that whether an organization is essentially a business-to-business player or whether business-to-consumer, these things are a big part of the context for why they're thinking afresh about how they offer services and create experiences for customers. And moving down from that is also creating a changing risk landscape. And it's obvious, of course, that when you start thinking about new ways to interact with people online and new kind of online propositions, that you need to think about risks surrounding things like identity theft and data breaches. But increasingly, we're seeing that the risk landscape's changing in the context of IP theft, for example, intellectual property theft, business continuity, and even product liability. If you have products out there in the wild that have digital connections to them, that actually changes the nature of the kinds of things you need to think about in terms of product liability risk, and more broadly about the life cycle of those products and how you support those products over time. And lastly, we're seeing changing stakeholder expectations. So whether those stakeholders are industry regulators or whether it's your shareholders or your wider community that you're really trying to act on behalf of, we're seeing that expectations there are really changing around much more transparency of operations, much more understanding of the impact that your business makes on its environment, whether you're talking about the physical and natural environment or communities around it. So it's really the era of digital technology is not just about new competitors. It's actually having an impact on expectations in stakeholders and customers, and it's also changing the risk landscape. So it's a kind of multifaceted thing we need to get our heads around. But drilling into that one level, we've done a fair amount of research talking to different leaders in organizations about what they think about when they think about digital transformation. So what does it mean to different people? And maybe not surprisingly, depending on who you ask, you get a different answer. And what I've tried to do is summarize that in this chart. And it'll become obvious in a minute why I'm talking about all these perspectives. So when we talk to heads of marketing, CMOs, they will really be talking about, we want to use digital technologies, mobile, social platforms, and so on, to drive better experiences for our customers. If you talk to communications people, internal comms or HR people, and you ask them about digital, they'll say, yes, we're really interested in digital technology and transforming. And for them, it's really about using technologies in new ways to drive employee engagement better, particularly in environments where you have dispersed workforces or workforces with high turnover within them. When you talk to COOs or heads of operations, they're thinking about how can we use big data, predictive analytics, mobile, connected devices, IoT kinds of thing, to drive more efficiency in our operations and to predict problems. And when you talk to people who are driving strategy or product innovation, they're thinking about, okay, how do we compete with new kinds of product proposition or new kinds of business networks that we might set up. Now, what everybody is actually talking about is fundamentally the same thing, but they're looking at it from different perspectives. What we come to realize is that the power of digital technologies is that they enable, in combination, you to coordinate resources more effectively. And that's what I'm talking about in this blue box over to the left. The reason these people have different views is that the kinds of resources they are thinking about are different. And I've used those axes on this chart to kind of try and draw some of that out. So the quadrants on the left are really concerned with resources that you control in your organization. The boxes on the right are resources that you don't actually control within your organization. They're out there in the market, but what you want to do is build capabilities that allow you to better engage or coordinate those resources outside of your control directly. The boxes at the top of the diagram are to do with resources that are around people and their knowledge, intangible resources, if you like. And the things at the bottom are really about resources that are more tangible. And so everybody here is really thinking about, actually in their own way, they're thinking about how digital technology makes the coordination of resources more efficient. And that's pretty interesting. But because of where they sit, they're really looking at different parts of the picture. Now, this is why it becomes particularly important to us today in this webinar. It's that it turns out that if you're serious about digital transformation in your organization, you can't just think about one of these boxes. It's fine for an initiative to be initially led by one group, but you very soon will come up against the need to actually stitch these things together. So just to give you two very brief examples, imagine, for example, that your initiative is really spearheaded by the people in charge of marketing, and they're creating great new ways to engage with customers online. Well, you know what? You might sell a product to somebody online, but if when you come to really onboard that new customer into your organization, get them set up with your products and services, get them set up with the right representatives and so on, if you are not doing that in a streamlined fashion, if it's not joined up, then it's almost worse than not doing anything at all. If you create a really, really great initial experience for your customer, but you're not really backing that up in your operations, then that's a big issue. Likewise, you may start your initiative and focus on your operations. You may start to get much more insight into how your operations are flowing. But you're missing an opportunity if you don't then take that insight and maybe drive some of that insight back towards your customers, so that you're really adding value to your customers by giving them much more transparency into the service you're delivering to them and how that's working day to day. Those are just two fairly trivial examples of why it's really important to not just think about one part of this picture. But how do we create those connections? And the answer is by weaving what I call digital threads through your organization. Okay. That's a challenge, though. And the reason it's a challenge, certainly for any organization that's got any significant heritage, and particularly for medium or larger sized organizations, the challenge there is that when you think about how these threads need to be woven through your organization, what you really need to be doing is figuring out how to tie customer experience kind of interactions through your organization, through the sales, through onboarding, through operations, through to customer service, through to your partners and suppliers and so on, back again and again. So that's really all about integration, if you like. And great customer experiences do need to be integrated. We know that. They need to be integrated across channels and venues and different platforms. But many organizations, and yours may well be included in this, have spent 10, 15 years going in the opposite direction, not actually integrating, but dispersing particularly in the domain of operations, where we've seen, of course, the creation of shared services centers, creation of partnerships with offshore providers or other process outsourcing companies, more dynamic supply chains and partner networks. And that's really about dispersing your operations. So we really have a bit of a squaring the circle problem here. How do we create the integrated experience for our customers while also working across a dispersed operation? And this is this is something that needs really serious consideration. These digital threads, as I said, have to be woven through the different parts of your organization to enable us to really coordinate the different parts of how we're working so we can properly transform in support of a digital agenda. So what we need is some way of having some kind of platform in our organization that allows us to share knowledge, coordinate work, and make decisions across many different teams and across many different parts of the organization, and potentially across partners and suppliers too, in a way that enables us to not drop the ball. And we need to do that at scale, and we need to do it over and over again, because unless we can do that, we're not really supporting customers' journeys effectively. We're going to get gaps, we're going to get balls being dropped, we're going to get situations where people, as they say, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And all of these things, of course, create great big pitfalls for anybody serious about driving new kinds of customer experience. Now, I want to just go one level deeper briefly and talk about one other aspect of digital technology and transformation. Many organizations, when they think about this, they will think really about the end state. They'll think about how can we use digital technologies in our business, in different parts of our business, in marketing and operations and so on. And they'll think of internet-based things like platform as a service, software as a service. They might think about social platforms. They might think about connected devices and IoT. They might think about mobile apps and mobile devices. That's the left-hand side of the picture. But the more profound realization that the organizations we're finding that are further ahead with this journey, that's what they realize is that it's not only about using those technologies, the left-hand side. It's actually about changing the way that you change, using digital technologies to create platforms for your business that do three key things. Firstly, they're instrumented. So when you build capability on top of these platforms, they give you insight into how well things are doing, how you're performing, whether that's you're delivering a product or a service or you're enabling that through a business process. It's about visibility and real-time understanding of what's working and what's not working, so you can see where to change. Secondly, they give you real agility around how you change those capabilities. And third, they tie those things together. So let's try and bring this all together. And what's really interesting when we bring it all together is we realize that business process platforms, or I'll modify that, good business process platforms are actually a super fit for everything I've been talking about. Is that many organizations just don't realize that fit is there. So if you look first off at the right-hand side of this chart, what I've been talking about over the last few slides is we need to create platforms that allow us to share knowledge and coordinate work across teams, departments, and entities. That's really about creating those digital threads, if you remember, that bring together those different domains of digital interest. Whether we're talking about the customer experience, whether we're talking about employee engagement, whether we're talking about operations or products and platforms. It's about tying all of those things together. That's creating the digital threads. Number two, we're talking about platforms that make it easier to change behavior and policy and enact that through our organization in terms of the work people do. And thirdly, platforms that make it easy to track and manage business performance over time. That's what you get with a good business process platform. It's just that many people, when they think about that technology, first off, many people are still stuck in the thought that these things are principally about efficiency and standardizing work. And yes, they can be used for that, but actually they can be super accelerators for the kind of stuff we're talking about here. All right. Now I'm going to shift gears one more time and go one step further in this thought process. Another area of kind of related research we've been doing is talking to people in organizations who are trying to drive faster change. Sometimes these people will have a title like Chief Innovation Officer, Head of Innovation, but in fact maybe, in many cases they don't. They don't have a specific innovation job title, but they are responsible for driving a capability in an organization which is about experimentation, doing things faster, exploring new spaces. And these people, of course, and their teams create new kinds of demand on the technology and the technology people we have in our organizations. So we've been running some workshops and some roundtables, and the kinds of things we're hearing from these people are pretty interesting. They're saying things like, you can see here, they need and want platforms that enable them to move quickly, enable them to experiment, change. They need to start small, grow fast. They need to find ways to be creative, and they need to operate kind of not within the same restrictions as kind of traditional IT so often is. And what's really interesting is when you talk to these people about who they model themselves on, they don't model themselves on the traditional IT kind of players of 10 years ago, whether that's IBM or SAP or Oracle or Teradata or any of those guys. They model themselves on the company on the left. They model themselves on Netflix or Salesforce or Amazon Web Services. What they want is they want tools that are consumable. They want capabilities that are very scalable, very, very quickly get started with, and very, very agile. Now, the challenge is, though, of course, how do we do that within existing organizational constraints? I'm sure any of you who work in IT know that IT organizations are not short of things to do. In fact, we're halfway through running a survey right now that shows very clearly that keeping up with demand is extraordinarily challenging. So how do we do that? How do we first off start to create these platforms that enable us to create these digital threads, coordinate work between people, between teams, between parts of our organization, work in an agile way, and really drive much more of a fast-moving digital agenda? Well, and the answer is that we need to find new ways to manage that demand. And one way is to basically say, no, we're not doing that. That's not going to get you very far. Another way is to bring more high productivity tools into IT, and that is absolutely part of the answer. But another thing that we're seeing is leading organizations saying, well, you know what, if we have the right tools, we can actually push some of that demand back out to business functions, business teams, with the right support from IT. And I want to share two quick examples with you here of organizations that really didn't have access to specialized tools that enabled them to kind of delegate that work to business teams, but they actually built those tools themselves. So I'm not necessarily recommending that you do the same. These two banks that we've done some work with had to work very hard to create these platforms themselves, but they've shown that you can do incredible things if you have capabilities that enable you to kind of really engage business teams much more closely and enable them to do much more of the running themselves. So I want to talk you through these two examples. You're probably ahead of me already looking at the notes on the slide. So on the left, we've got a large Portuguese bank. Frankly, was struggling through the financial crisis of 2007 and started embarking on what you could only describe as a radical digital transformation program. The CEO decided he wanted to have every business process digital. So no paper, everything end-to-end digital. It was as I say, a radical kind of manifesto, and in a very difficult financial time. So they actually built their own homegrown framework on top of a platform they already had that enabled business teams to define their own applications. not extraordinarily complicated applications, but in fact, when you look at the overall population of processes they were trying to digitize, by number, it was still the majority. Because, of course, like in any distribution, you have some processes which are very complicated, very, very mission critical, very high volume, very important to think very, very hard about and scale to extreme levels. But then you have a long tail of things that are actually not quite so mission critical, but still very, very important to think about and to not ignore. And that's really what these guys focused on with this framework. Importantly, the framework actually had performance monitoring and auditing built into it, because, of course, in banking, you really do need that for many reasons. And through this program, they actually managed to digitize, I think it was over 1,200 processes in about 2 years. And they engaged about 70% of the bank's employees in doing this work, this digital work. So they really had worked through the bulk of that very, very radical agenda. And as they did that, they actually reduced their corporate IT involvement in BPM initiatives by 70%. So by essentially completely rethinking how they managed demand and how they built capabilities, and by radically shifting that line between IT and business groups, they managed to have very, very impressive impact in the way that their organization digitized its operations. Similar kind of story here on the right with Turkey's first national bank. It's called İşbank. And the context is slightly different here, though. They wanted to really reinvent their shared services centers and their branch back offices. They did some benchmarking and found that they were really way out of line with where their competitors were in terms of that back office effectiveness, and had very, very complex process landscape that was needlessly complex. They had over 500 processes, and they realized they really didn't need that many. Actually, they were really looking at variance and processes that weren't properly managed. Now, again, what they did here was they realized that 15 of those processes were very, very complicated business critical things that had to be dealt with separately, and IT kept control of those and built those in quite a traditional way. But what they did for the bulk of the rest was they built a generic process framework that was really targeted at processes that were, at the time, enacted principally through sending Excel spreadsheets over email, and that happened an awful lot. And the framework was essentially designed as a replacement for that. It was designed as a very easy-to-use way of bringing teams together to coordinate their work, stay on the same page, and that process application, that framework, is now used across over 200 processes. They've reduced their headcount in their shared services by 300. What they haven't done is got rid of those people. What they've actually done is put those people in more customer-facing roles and sales roles, and as a result, they've grown their business over the last 3 years by 50% without increasing their headcount. Now, let that sink in for a moment. For a large bank, that is, frankly, pretty astounding. And so what you see here is that two banks, quite different markets for different reasons, have taken it upon themselves over the last couple of years to do this themselves without any help from kind of commercial products. They've built their own frameworks, and they've had outstanding results. What we're going to talk about in a second is commercial alternatives to doing it yourself, because these guys did it because they had resources, they had real burning needs to do something, and the technology at the time wasn't really part of where they were at. Things are quite different now, and there are alternatives out there. So that's me. I hope you found that useful. You've got some details there. You can, of course, ask questions and answers as we go, but please, you're very welcome to get in touch with me afterwards. I realize that's our corporate Twitter handle there, MWD Advisors. My own Twitter handle is NeilWD, NEILWD, if you want to link up with me on Twitter. And be very happy to continue the conversation. But now I'm going to hand over to Neil Young from FlowForma, and I'm going to ask him some questions about his experiences. Okay, so Neil.
Yes. Hi, Neil. How are you? And hi to everybody. Thanks for taking the time out to join today's call.
So I'm Neil. Hopefully that was a good kind of intro to kind of the stuff that you're doing. Now I know that FlowForma, it really plays into all of the spaces I've really been trying to kind of lay out for people over the last few minutes. So can you tell me, and can you tell the audience, what are the benefits that you're seeing from your experiences with customers as you engage them with FlowForma?
Yeah, some really insightful points made there, Neil. So in terms of, especially, you land around the two banks at the end there, and I think what the Portuguese bank achieved is quite remarkable. And I suppose sometimes cause of events creates these things to happen, as you mentioned, and using existing resources, etc. We've had some recent successes in terms of companies adopting our technology, maybe not to the same extent that the Portuguese bank, for example, managed to achieve in such a short space of time, over 2 years. But we have seen customers of ours, say, come back in 12 months with 60 plus processes built out on our platform, and up and running with different process owners in the business using our platform. So I think, and you're absolutely spot on in terms of 2007, 2008, that these technologies exist, and no, they didn't. And we got very interested in this around 2011, when we were seeing one scenario whereby people weren't achieving a return on investment for these small business process projects because it took so long to develop. Mm-hmm. And also that in terms of where empowering process owners or citizen developers, that still wasn't really that boundary wasn't being pushed at that stage. There was quite a lot of work going into enterprise business process management suites, and they were achieving quite a lot, but they had obviously a price tag to go with that. So yeah, there's quite a lot of that we would resonate with what you talk about there, and there is advancements. And maybe would it help if I'll talk through just some of the three key benefits we see from these platforms?
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you look at the top three benefits, the number one benefit would be project delivery success. So if you think around customers engaging on long projects, and sometimes we can talk about 2 years, but even if we take 6-month project, the amount of people involved, the setting of the requirements, and again, from experience in the waterfall approach of things, you could be spending 3 to 6 months alone working on specification of requirements. So by the time you get moving and working on the project, these things have moved on, these things have changed, and then you spend quite a lot of time working on change requests. Now, it would be fair to say that agile methodologies and Scrum methodologies came along to counter such a thing, and continuous improvement. And I suppose where test and learn pushes it a little bit more, pushes the envelope quite a bit more. Agile would talk a lot around scrums and sprints and defining it in 20-day periods, for example. So each of these circles that you would see here would be 10-day sprints, for example. In the test and learn delivery mode, it doesn't really work that way. It's not time bound as such. So you're very much starting at the start in a workshop mode, and the technologies need to be there to support this, it's fair to say. So you've got to have a technology that can enable you to build out a process quickly at a very strawman level with your audience. So bring your business users into the room, build out your process, ask them the questions. What are the things you need to capture? What are the different steps that you need to pass this form through within the business? And if it's different geographical locations, all these kind of things, get these questions out and let's start building this and play it back. And if there's any inputs that can help in advance, like process diagrams and specifications, all that helps. But that workshop, on a series of workshops, is very much about getting this proof of concept package built. Now, there's nothing different or nothing new around proof of concepts. That's been around for for many years. I suppose it's the concept of building that in the workshop with the users that changes the mode of this. And then you're very much moving into, you're not getting so focused on what's our process specification going to be for this 6-month project. You're now moving into a test and learn cycle. So we've taken some feedback from the workshop. We're going to take it away. We're going to make some further adjustments. We're going to test this back to the business. We're going to learn from the business. We might do some pilots. So it's very iterative indeed, like Agile, but it's just more fluid and it's not time bound. And to put it in context, you could be rolling out, for one example, there was a performance appraisal system rolled across a 15,000 person organization in the space of 2 months, and it was 20 days effort. So how quickly you can achieve things with these platforms with this approach is quite key. A few things to be aware of, and I mentioned it earlier, would be that the tools need to fit. So you have to have the right tool to fit this approach. And the second thing would be that you can apply Agile and Waterfall to these platforms. The key thing there is that you're not taking full advantage of what they can provide by taking those approaches. So we would still engage with customers that may use the Agile approach. That's their process. We rarely see Waterfall these days, but it's just to be aware of that. In terms of in summary, what's that driving? No long specifications, no debates around change requests, which can just become as painful as debating about the specification. No more failed projects. We have found with this approach, this test and learn delivery approach, that the success percentage is through the roof in comparison. So it's a surefire way of getting that project in place. Indeed, we worked with a multi-billion dollar organization last year, and 4 times they tried to bring their project live for innovation, capturing ideas, and all these decisions were multi-million dollar decisions. So people didn't take it lightly, but they could not get the project live with other technologies. So I would argue that by taking this approach with our technology, made sure we got it live, but the approach was a big part of it. Minimal dependency on IT, which is important, and you mentioned that you still need central control. That's granted, but that dependency on IT to actually refine and build out the processes. And we might come to that a little bit later about what people you need in that you need some way of connecting that back to IT. So it's just minimal. It's not no dependency. It's minimal. And reducing project costs. That's what we all want to achieve. So I love this caption. So we talk about the second benefit. We're talking about time to deliver, and we've covered some of that in the first benefit, but this is a bit more specific. So in terms of no longer the big beating the small, but the fast beating the slow. And you talked about Uber and Netflix and other technology companies earlier on. It's very valid that, and what we have now is the millennials, and you've got Generation Y, and you've got this demand for, we need this now. So people, it's not only what technologies are delivering, it's what people expect today. So we put that in context and speed of delivery. We talk about, and we took this from a recent Forrester survey, and they looked at a major US healthcare consultancy company spent 24 months training up 150 developers on their platform before they delivered any projects to the healthcare organizations. And again, last year we rolled out a project with a local sports organization called the GEA, but they have 500,000 members worldwide. And it was taking 6 to 8 weeks to process their coach. So people that coach the sport and coach the game, they would have to go through a vetting process that would involve the local police. So we took it all online. We turned it into an e-vetting process. We put a page connected to their website from Azure where they would capture the coach's details and passport images, etc. And that would come into the back office system in Office 365. And it would be processed internally and connected to the local police. And from start to finish, that took 4 weeks to go live. So not just to bring it into pilot, that was 4 weeks to go live. So that's the difference, and that's what people are expecting, where you're finding these days. And in terms of that benefit, what we see when we talk about old world versus new world, the old world, very strong dependency on IT. There was upfront high-cost licenses, 2 to 3 weeks role-based training. That doesn't mean that you're finished. You probably could have 4 or 5 roles to skill up on. You have the waterfall agile approach and predominantly on-premise. And what we see now is in terms of the new world with a no-code approach, so it's pushing that envelope even further, and low-cost recurring pricing models, so you can adopt it at a low entry price point and scale it out as it fits. Very low level, flatten that learning curve. 1 to 2 days training and self-paced learning as well is very essential. Test and learn deliveries we talked about. And we talk hybrid and cloud. We still see hybrid very prominent, but cloud is becoming much stronger. So those benefits really, that all adds to that benefit. And in terms of the third benefit, we're looking at optimizing your workforce. And this is really, in terms of what we all have challenges, and ourselves as a product company, we have challenges in terms of recruiting the right people into the business. And developers and software developers with the right skill sets can be, that can be quite challenging for all companies these days. So imagine, so we've got project teams that are costly, and in addition to that, we've got a scarcity of resources. So I love the example you had earlier on, which is actually repurposing staff into sales and customer facing. That's really what companies want to do. They don't want to lose the good staff, but they do want to repurpose. So we talk around the rise of the citizen developer, which is, so let's empower a citizen developer within business units to build out these processes. And by doing it this way, you're optimizing your workforce. You're leveraging what you have already, as opposed to trying to chase the scarcity of resources that's driving up your cost base as well as everything else. And when we talk about that, those citizen developers or process owners, what do they have? They need business analysis skill sets. They need to understand business and how it works, and obviously your business. How does your business work? And then they need to be very good communication skills. So they need to be able to interface between IT and the business. That's essential. You still need to be connected to IT. We would pretty insist on that, and we always tend to we either have a conversation starting with IT and then connecting to the business, or the other way around. We rarely exclude IT. And understanding of the business problems is essential. So that's what really, and if you can think of those skill sets and the value that adds to your business, do you have them in your business today? Is the question, and can you leverage them?
I completely agree with that. I think just for what it's worth, I think it's very often going to be the case. You'll still need to have those links into IT, but the important thing is to have a platform that allows you to clearly separate those, so you're able to bring the right skills into the right activities without getting anything kind of blended together in a complicated way. You need that clear separation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So fantastic. So well, you've got a slide up there which kind of is a nice signpost. Yeah, I mean, when we were talking before we started the webinar, we were trying to figure out how to structure it. We agreed, didn't we, that there's no point trying to talk about all of this without recognizing the fact that actually we're talking about things that change the nature of how our businesses work and how we get things done. And there's always challenges with that, because it's never just about buying the technology and kind of switching it on. So I think we both agreed that it's worth talking a bit about some of the key issues that come up. So why don't you tell me a bit about what you see when you're out there talking to people and using FlowForma in anger, as it were?
Yeah, sure. So if I take the first challenge that we come across, which is quite common, obviously, is the culture piece. So we've a nice little graphic to kind of take a take on that. But in terms of quite common thing is that's not how we do things around here. So we're coming in with a technology platform. We're not talking low code. We're talking no code. We're talking about empowering the business. And everybody starts thinking about the days, especially IT, they think about the days of end user computing, where loads of people built out loads of access databases. And then 5 years later, somebody left the organization. They couldn't find the access databases, and it turns out 15 million of transactions were running through it. So there's some of the horror stories, but it's that scenario whereby all these applications got devolved through the power of end user computing. and it created quite a bit of a scar, you know. So people were concerned that, you know, if it's sitting out there with these tools and we empower the process owners, we don't know what's going on. So that goes back to our chat earlier on, where we're talking about connected to IT, and these technologies have to be centrally managed. You have to allow IT manage it. So I think that's quite important, and that's how we help get that message across. I mean, the biggest threat to innovation, really, there's two things. You know, there's the internal politics of change that we're talking about here, and then there's a culture that doesn't accept failure. So if they're not willing to try these things and appreciate, and you had a great term earlier on around fail fast. So I think fail fast, scale fast. I think that works very well in their mode. So you may have some things, so they might become. There is definitely more of a propensity in this mode to have more success for projects, but some things may not work just for a variety of reasons with the business in this mode, because you're testing some initiatives. So you've got to accept that. And we do find a way of helping with that. Second point is around bimodal IT. And it's positioning with IT and with the business that, you know, you've got your high-end, high availability systems that you are going to take 6 months to make changes to, and that's just the nature of it, because it's absolutely critical to the running of the business, and it's been here for 10 years, and so on and so forth. And then we've got Mode 2, and this is the up and coming. This is maybe a new business area or a new idea, or we want to build out a process and connect with our customers or connect with our partners. We don't want to impact their Mode 1 systems, and we don't want to, we don't want to disrupt that. We want to test it first. We want to put it in place. If I can give briefly a customer story here, we had one large life sciences customer that works in generic drugs, and they would have proposed to the business, we have this technology we want to buy for 1 million. It's in Mode 1, 6 to 12 month project, and it's going to prove how we're going to manage our artworks process much more efficiently and better for the whole business across the globe. And the company balked at it. They then engaged with ourselves and said, we need to prove this to the business. And in 3 weeks, they had a prototype they could show back to the business. In 3 months, they were live with a worldwide system. Moving it forward 12 months later, they've really shown to the business how you can manage that. It pretty much runs that part of the business for them. And now they're looking at Mode 1 systems that will do this. They're going back to look at this bigger system for €1 million, as well as use their system for other initiatives. So it can be a great way of presenting a business case and presenting a cause without spending a huge amount of money, and help prove points within the business. So we could talk for another hour about bimodal IT, and some of our systems in FlowForma move from Mode 2 to Mode 1 and stay in FlowForma as well. So it's quite an encompassing area, but
right.
That's just one of the ways you can deal with the culture shift. And I'm just conscious of time. So in terms of the second challenge would be perception, and this, I call this the enterprise perception. You know, you come into an organization, and we have organizations up to 50, 60,000 users on the platform. But in some areas that you deal with, there will be, well, you know, we hear that they can't scale. This can't scale. So the most common objection to low-code platforms we hear is they can't scale to support broader enterprise requirements. And we would come across that quite a lot. And then it's about proving that. So making sure these technologies have proven scalable architecture for the number of users. Referenceability always helps as well in this space. Have they considered, multi-tier environments, multi-stage environments from development of UAT to live? Back to that point around centralized management features. IT need to know what's being used and where and how it's being controlled, and security and audit. All of that needs to be in play. And sometimes what people can miss is the scalable pricing model. So have they got a scalable pricing model that lets an enterprise organization roll this up and place it across the organization, and allow the process owners to put it in place? So if this technology was in place when the Portuguese bank came looking, would that have solved their problems across the board, and would it have been priced efficiently for them? So it has to have those three dimensions in our view. And then if we move to the third challenge, we very much relate this back to ourselves and how we solve this problem. I think what's key with some of these technologies is that they can come in and say we can solve the world, and sometimes it's not about that, and maybe it's what problems are you can you solve? don't just say you're going to solve all these problems and all these business process problems, because this may not suit the technology. So, for example, and it's always a good question to ask, what does this technology platform solve? In our world, we pick 3 different types of process groups. We talk about everyday processes, and even if I just talk about IT, HR, and finance forms that go across the organization, we do that quite well in a matter of days to implement. Then we move up, and as you move up this scale, you're moving up in your ROI and business case. So it can be very worthwhile starting with the everyday processes just to get the technology bedded in, and then move into more. The dark processes we talk are very specific to a business. They could be sitting inside an Access database, a spreadsheet, emails moving around, poor visibility to management about these processes. And then, like the life sciences argument earlier on, when you bring them into a structured system, then people all see the value and all see the metrics. And you talked about instrumentation earlier on. It's exactly that. And then we talk about collaborative decision processes are newer ways of dealing with multiple people coming in and making decisions and voting on tenders, for example, and doing it in a very collaborative fashion. And again, we would probably need to cover another webinar to cover that in a bit more detail. Again, higher ROI when rolling those out. So that's how we address it. That's the problems we solve, and I think it's really important that whatever technology people adopt, that they clearly understand what problem that technology is looking to solve.
Completely agree.
So very quickly, Sorry. So very quickly, you can go to our FlowForma website. You can access our latest videos and demos. You can access try a free trial, or contact us. My details are here. You should be able to get that in our content packs as well. So I think at this stage, I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to hand you back to Teresa, and thanks for the chat, Neil.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. We've been listening to Neil Ward-Dutton of MWD Advisors and Neil Young from FlowForma. And Neil Young mentioned these resources that he has for you, and there's also links to these in the resource section to the right of the slide area. Just click on those links now. They're going to open in a new browser tab, so when the webinar is over with, you can go over and check out that information. Also, when you download a copy of the slides, that's also in the resources section, you'll have access to all of these links and the contact information for both Neils. Feel free to reach out to them and avail yourself to the help and the opportunity, and pick their brains for more information. A question that has come in, and someone was asking about when Neil Ward-Dutton was speaking of benchmarking work and the research work that his organization is doing. Someone was just asking more specifically about how to get a hold of all of this research and benchmarking data. Again, the link that's in the slides to MWD Advisors, there's also a link in the resources, but also AIM offers a lot of benchmarking research data as well, and that's available at aim.org/research. Or just go to the AIM website, and it's all navigable from the landing page as well. So 2 really good resources to get this benchmarking data to help you make the case and help you move forward in these efforts, as important as all of these efforts are. Someone else is asking, and Neil Young, let me direct this question over to you. Someone's asking, which industries are you seeing the most traction for these low-code or no-code type of platforms?
Yeah, so we've seen quite a lot of traction in fast-moving commercial goods / manufacturing organizations. As you can see around operational efficiencies and enabling their workforce, it's quite attractive. Life sciences, I would have talked about earlier on, driving real value there and seeing a lot of necessity, and they're more open to cloud these days, which is quite interesting. So once it's regulated, you can support those guys. Professional services organizations would be very common, document heavy, process heavy, forms heavy. Seeing a lot of activity in professional services organizations. And very quickly, most recently, what we're seeing newly surfacing, which is a sign of economy in the time, is engineering and construction. So we're seeing more coming in that space, which hopefully means good for all of us. But that's what we're seeing at the moment.
And Neil Ward-Dutton, I want to direct this next question to you, and I realize that this question is one of those big ones that can be a whole webinar unto itself. But in the group chat, someone had commented early on about the obstacles to getting management on board to do this. And so this is a change management type of question. Any quick thoughts or tips to help work with changing mindsets within an organization, especially at that C-suite level, to embrace the change and not be doing everything the way we've been doing it for 30 years? Just some thoughts on helping people get to where they want their organizations to be.
Well, of course, the change management issue is, has to be tackled differently depending on who you're talking about trying to influence, right? So it's absolutely, it is vital really that you have that C-level sponsorship if you're going to embark on a really, really big program of work and looking at how your organization functions. And I think you're right, Teresa. It's really a webinar in itself. The challenge is that it's so context specific. So, but the kinds of things that I would be trying to bring to the table to convince a really a senior leader would be data about the benefits that the other organizations are seeing in terms of, for example, their customer loyalty is a good area to look at. To look at profitability, if you can get it. Of course, it only really works for public companies. Looking at the productivity within that organization, so fundamentally the amount of value they're adding in relation to the size of the workforce they have, things like the share of voice that they have in media in their markets. So those things are all pretty important and interesting. Talking about competitors is another good one, because fear also is quite a good motivator. So there is so much information around these days from various websites and providers who will they have great big databases and directories of investments in different sectors, startups in different sectors, strategies that are being employed. So those are always a great place to go to look for evidence of disruption or potential disruption. I would definitely encourage people to look at that. And if you're really looking at change management in the context of more of the making it happen kind of phase, if you like, so if you do already have sponsorship, but the challenge is how to really drive that through, then that has to all really be about engagement and co-creation. So, when you're really looking at digital transformation, it's not something you can impose on people, because frequently what you're really talking about is maybe quite radical reinvention of the way that things get done. Who does them, what order they get done in, what part of the organization they get done in. Maybe the work is being refactored so that the customer is doing some of the work. That sometimes happens with digital technologies. So some of these things can be quite kind of radical interventions, and unless you bring people from across the organization into that process and really engage them in designing what their own future looks like, you're very likely to get unstuck. And this is actually also plays back into the FlowForma side of things, right? Because one of the benefits of using tools that are more open to more widespread use, so they're not guarded by the priests in IT, but they're actually able to be used by people in different parts of businesses, that's a natural flow into that kind of broader organizational change management strategy, because you're not reaching out to those people, asking them how their job will change and then running away and building something behind big iron doors. You're actually making it with them, and you're enabling them to make it themselves. And that has very, very powerful impacts. I don't know, Neil, whether you have anything to add to that point particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm nodding my head here. So in terms of, so my final thought would be exactly that. In terms of test and learn approach, that's key. And that co-delivery approach, working with the business, is essential. Absolutely. to getting it right, because they've got buy-in from the start. So absolutely, I'd agree with that.
Well, thank you, everyone. We are at the end of our webinar hour, and just want to remind you that in addition to AIM research, there's also AIM training available to you. Again, good resources for you as you embark on these endeavors. Just want to remind you this webinar has been recorded, and so come back, listen to it again, share it with your colleagues, download the resources for you. Greatly value your feedback and appreciate your taking the survey. And very much want to thank our underwriter, FlowForma. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinar. So thank you very much, FlowForma, for your sponsorship and support of the webinar. And just very briefly, 30 seconds, I just want to ask each of you for a key takeaway, the most valuable nugget that you'd like to remind people with everything that we've discussed today. And Neil Young from FlowForma, your closing thought today?
Yeah, I think the culture piece will be is a big piece to watch, and if you can get over those challenges and those hurdles and bring it in gently, and show people the fruits of your labor quickly. I mentioned that pharma organization earlier on, so by being able to show within 2 or 3 weeks prototypes back to the business, I think that's a great way of shifting mindsets. Nothing like people seeing something to be able to, they've got to visualize it, they've got to see it, and then they're starting to buy into change. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's one way to crack this nut.
Thank you. And Neil Ward-Dutton of MWD Advisors, your closing thoughts today.
Well, the flippant thought is that process technology is sexy again. And the slightly less flippant way of saying that is, we're so used to thinking about process technology as being about standardization and efficiency. But actually, if we turn it around and look at it through the lens of digitization, we can see that the technology that we actually have already at our fingertips can potentially have a really profound impact. And the key to that is really about thinking about how it enables new audiences to really get involved in driving change in their own organizations, and not kind of separating it out as being something that only specialists do.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we'll see you on our next webinar. And have a good day.